Thank you, Deputy Speaker. And Australia certainly needs a sensible and practical approach to international education. However, I'm greatly concerned by the government's narrative characterising this bill as a response to the shonks and crooks in the sector. Now, there are over 1,400 private education and vet providers, many of which are actually high-quality providers. However, the Labor government itself is far more responsible than these high-quality providers for the majority of the international education challenges. Because it is an indictment on the Labor government during a cost of living crisis here in Australia, a cost of living and inflation crisis caused directly by Labor's $315 billion excessive increase in spending that has driven up the cost of everything, including mortgages, housing, rent and accommodation. And at a time of critical housing shortages, Labor has made this situation so much worse by simply opening the floodgates to record numbers and levels of international students. Labor has actually doubled the number of foreign students studying in Australia, from 336,845 in March of 2022 to 713,144 in February of 2024. Now, there's no doubt that this has created a mess entirely of Labor's own making, even worse as a regional MP, at the same time that Labor has allowed record numbers of international students into major city university. What was confirmed at recent Senate inquiry hearings was that regional and smaller universities and private education providers have had their student visa approvals reduced by 73,000 this year. Now, that I see as discriminatory against the regional universities. Once again, or as we see in so many of Labor's policies, the regions are bearing the brunt of Labor's discrimination. It's all about those inner-city elites and the big end of town for Labor. Just compare the numbers. At the University of Sydney, almost half of all students enrolled in semester 1 this year were the 32,800 international students who were granted visas. Keep in mind that the University of Sydney already receives the majority of taxpayer funding of all our universities, around $1 billion every year. Actually, it's 47% of federal taxpayer university funding. And in considering the social licence with the Australian people needed to keep supporting higher education, this is the same university that facilitated anti-Semitic hate, incitement and vilification on its campus, where the UK-prescribed extremist terrorist organisation Hizb ut-Tahrir infiltrated the pro-Palestinian camp at the university campus itself. And the same university gave the Muslim Students Association a dedicated seat on the university's working group with access to defence and security-related industries and research. And last week, hundreds of students voted to support anti-Israel motions, including support for a single Palestine state from the river to the sea, effectively supporting the destruction of Israel and its people. Appalling, disgusting and discriminatory treatment of students who did not support the motions is what we saw. How on earth can Jewish students and staff be safe on the University of Sydney campus? The Shadow Minister is entirely correct when she said freedom of speech and academic freedom are vitally important, but this does not include the right to trample on the rights of others. Equally, I expect all research and business entities, particularly those engaged in AUKUS or other defence-related industries, to reconsider their involvement with the University of Sydney as a result. All of these instances bring into question the social licence compact the university has with the Australian people and Australian taxpayers. And this is the university that government granted 32,800 international student visas to, at the same time, regional and smaller universities and private education providers have had their student visa approvals slashed by that 73,000 this year alone. In fact, Australia's most prestigious universities have had a 16% increase in their numbers of foreign students. Now, not only has this affected our regional universities, what this does very directly is to decrease the accommodation and rental properties available, particularly for our regional students who have no choice but to study at city universities. And the reasons for this is that those courses are not available Either there are no universities in their regions, or because the courses they need to study, such as medicine, law, pharmacy or engineering, are not available in those regional universities. But the knock-on effect of the Labor's doubling of overseas student numbers in a practical sense is that our regional students not only have to compete for the accommodation, and I talk to these families all of the time, often totally unaffordable accommodation if they can find it, but also for the jobs they desperately need to help support themselves when they have to live in the city and away from their home and family. Many of our regional students cannot and do not receive youth allowance or any other form of government support to help with the ever-increasing accommodation and other costs they've had to bear by having to live away from home and the significant inflation issues. And I strongly believe these same city-based universities need to do far more in supporting our regional and remote students. I've looked for the reporting of numbers of regional and remote students in various city-based university annual reports. Statistics were provided for international students, onshore, offshore and research training programs, but there were no statistics on the numbers of regional and remote students. In one I read, the international student experience was detailed, but not the regional and remote student experience. Well, why on earth not? Every university should not only be providing this information, but actively targeting and supporting the enrolment of these Australian students from our regions. I read in the university's Accord document where regional and remote students make up only 11% of the Group of 8 university cohorts. Now, our students in the regions deserve the right to a higher education. Surely this, in great part, is why our universities receive federal taxpayers' funding, to actually educate Australians, our domestic students and those who come from regional and remote Australia, who find it so hard to even get to university. I hope these same institutions respect the fact that our students come from regional Australia, where the majority of the wealth of this nation is actually produced. The contribution to the economy from resources, mining and agriculture that underpin Australia's economy, and in a large part pays for the education, health, infrastructure and general government services that we all rely on. Our students from the regional areas absolutely deserve a fair go from our higher education system. Now, another problem with the combination of Labor's record number of general immigration, that's almost 1 million people Labor has brought into Australia, is the really serious shortage of broader housing across the board. And it's not just a housing shortage, it's actually a housing crisis. Now, I see and hear about it every day in my electorate of Forrest in the southwest of WA. That nearly 1 million extra people is adding massive pressure, as I said, on health, education, transport and other infrastructure and services. Now, all of this may suit the government's political agenda, but it actually puts at risk the social licence that's needed from the Australian people, the social licence that ensures ongoing public support not only for the international student business model, but also for our skilled migration program. Now, part of this social licence is based on ensuring that the students who are accepted are genuinely students, not those people who are simply using the student visa system and process for an entirely alternative reason. It actually concerns me greatly that there's been a threefold increase in the number of international students who come to Australia on a student visa, but once here have sought asylum. To see these numbers increase threefold should be of major concern for the government. These people are clearly coming to Australia under false pretences, and once here are using our courts, our systems, to seek and claim asylum. And I note, added to this, Chinese students are not only having their visas granted at the highest level, but are also the top nationality making asylum claims once they're here in Australia. Unfortunately, overall, Labor has misled Australians by claiming the number of migrants will actually go down. However, actual figures, not projected figures, actual figures versus projected figures shows an increase in these numbers. And the government certainly needs to take this issue seriously. There is no doubt, as the Reserve Bank has acknowledged, that Labor's massive additional $315 billion in additional spending is not only driving inflation but keeping the basic costs of living for Australians much higher for longer. Hard-working Australians struggling to make ends meet are having to deal with the cost of housing up by 14%. And I see that recent ABS figures and statistics showed that the average Australian mortgage increased by $56,000 last financial year. In my home state of Western Australia, average mortgages are at a record high, increasing by 20% to $100,000 over the 12 months. South Australia and Queensland have seen similar increases. In general, these same mortgage holders who are paying at least an extra $1,000 every week are seeing their basic costs of living increasing as well. And when you consider that for a rural and regional family trying to send their young people to a city university because they have no choice, this simply adds to not only the cost of their family and the cost of living, but reduces the ability of that family to be able to send their kids to a university. The cost of education is up 10.9%, and it's actually even more for regional students having to study at City University. Food is up 11.4% and electricity 21.5%, and insurances are going through the roof. But with this legislation, the Minister will set caps on the number of international students who can study in Australia at any one time, but we haven't had any details in how the Minister will actually apply these caps in this legislation. We do know that the caps will come into force on the 1st of January, and there have been widespread concerns raised about these bills. So on that basis, Deputy Speaker, I conclude my remarks.